sitting down today with my dear friend, Merritt Quisumbing Anderson. Merritt is the former head of people at GitHub. She is an attorney. She's the mother of three. And more personally, she's somebody that I turn to personally and professionally when I'm struggling at Zander Media or across organizations that I'm building to figure out what are the approaches, right, to rapidly scaling organizations, to building incredible and diverse and healthy cultures. So Merritt, there's so much that I'm excited to unpack that we've never talked about, but thank you for taking the time for this interview.
I'm excited.
Such a delight. This has been a long time in development and scheduling. And when I look at the development of our friendship, I'm just kind of in awe. Like, you've been such an incredible support to me building Responsive Conference, now at Zander Media. I want to start with a story.
Okay.
As you know, I'm an outdoorsman. I grew up spending a lot of time in the mountains. And I've seen a lot of mother bears and their cubs. And when you come across a mother bear and a cub at a very safe distance, there's nothing more precious and adorable. And then there was the time where there was a cub up this tree. There were actually two of them. I was with my family growing up. I was probably like 7. And there was no mother bear anywhere in sight. And then we heard a coughing behind us on the trail. And we were standing in between the mother bear and the cub, and I've never been more scared in my life. And when I describe you to people who don't know you, I describe you as a mother bear who, certainly for your family and for your friends, and I count myself blessed to be among them, and for the organizations that you support, you bring a level of care and compassion and empathy. And then when shit hits the fan, a level of getting shit done and showing up, and nothing will stand in your way for you to take care of your people. So yeah, I wanted to start with that because that's who you are to me personally and professionally. That's what I think of when I think of you.
Oh my gosh, Robin, I appreciate that so much. I think about like how far we came when you were the first person to ask me to talk about parenthood at work. And it was sort of taboo because I felt like the seasoned veteran who was trying to juggle all the things but not really able to talk about it, right? Like coming into work every day and wanting to be doing all the things for the kids but not wanting to take the phone call because I've got to be present at work. And I think we've come so far, and geez, that was what, 2018, 2019. Just how much things have changed where it's on the forefront, and I can totally embrace this mama bear mentality, and it actually makes me be a better leader and more present because I feel like we're talking about it more, and it's framing how we build workplaces because this is just the reality. And if we don't want more women to leave the workplace, we have to make it a priority. So thank you for that. That means so much to me.
Yeah. Let's actually start with the parenthood conversation and your trajectory, which I've had the pleasure of witnessing and being a little bit of a part of around parenthood at work. So Parenthood was something, big shout out to People Tech Partners that Robbie Peters of People Tech Partners was really spearheading. And Zander Media made a lot of content around. You and I met through some of those initiatives, and I invited you to come and speak at Responsive Conference 2019 at Zappos HQ that we put on with Tony Hsieh prior to his death, et cetera, to come and speak on parenthood. I don't think I really knew what a big deal that was for you prior to you saying yes, and then you turned around and told me. So maybe can you talk about, as a professional, how taboo parenthood at work was for you in 2019?
I think it was taboo because, at the time, tech was still so very young. Me joining GitHub after leaving Kaiser, where I was on the younger end of things, and coming into a tech environment where you hear all the things. Everybody was between the ages of like 26 and 32, and I was above that. And I had 2 kids, and I was 3 months pregnant when I joined the company. And you hear about the hustle and all the things that you need to do and the tech bro culture. And it's like, oh my gosh, I'm not only a woman, I'm over 35. I'm a woman of color. I've read all of this stuff. And I have like 3 kids at home where we glorified the let's go out to the happy hour or let's go out to the club or the bar or whatever. And I couldn't do those things because I was an hour away from home, and I wanted to get home for the baseball game or the basketball game or to see the performance at school. And it just really wasn't a thing at all. And so I think it was really difficult I think in the 4.5 years I was at GitHub, just seeing the development and the growth of the diverse folks that we hired over the course of those 4 years, right? More parents, more, caretakers of aging parents, and more people at the time that were reaching over that 30-year-old threshold that were looking to have families. And now all of a sudden it's like, hey, Merritt, you've been here and done that. Like, how do you do it? Like, talk to me.
Yeah.
And so I got to have those conversations in an open way, but we still weren't talking about it as an industry until you had us at Responsive. And then there were some subsequent people tech partner conversations that happened thereafter. And now it's a thing. Working with like Clio and working with Carrot Fertility and talking about all the different facets of what it means to like build and have a family. It's just become a much more multidimensional conversation versus it's the mom who works, who has the child or the children. And like, what does that mean? So I think it really broke it open. And I remember you asking me, you're like, what do you talk about? And I was like, well, I talk about remote work. And I was like, you're like, yeah,
you've given 1,000 talks about remote work.
And you're like, let's not do that. As I'm like sitting at the nail shop, like getting a pedicure. You're like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm actually not working. What do you talk about? I don't know. So I think you pulling it out and saying, let's talk about it. And with Caitlin and Natasha and Michael, like it was fantastic to be able to say like, here's a group of people that have done it in all different ways. Like, let's talk about it.
And we'll link to that for folks watching and listening. We'll link to that hour-long Parenthood at Work panel that we did at Responsive Conference. Before moving away from that, what does it mean to be a working parent in 2022? Right? If that's where we were in 2019, and then COVID and the murder of George Floyd and everything that's happened in the last few years, it's certainly not gotten easier to be a working parent.
Yeah. I think the pivot now, which is the natural pivot, is the focus on mental health, because I think now we're starting to feel the reverberations of 2 years of being, I like to say, like I used to be a runner, like the adrenaline that goes into getting ready for the race, right? And the gun goes off. And I feel like we've been sprinting for 2 years, and now we're sort of like,
can't do that.
We can't. Like, we're running that last like 100 yards where you're cooling your body off, and then you kind of are like, I need something to drink, I need a nap, I need a break, I need something. And I can speak personally for me and people that I talk to. It's like, how do we get support for our kids, and how do we get support for ourselves to kind of figure out how to navigate how we come off of the last 2+ years. Because I think there was, I don't like to use the word damage, but like there's pain and there's bruising and there's hurt and just different ways of interacting with each other and supporting. Like, the old frameworks don't work anymore. And so I think it's really figuring out how we get mental health support to navigate and traverse some of these things.
Don't mind the dog. Her tail is whomping the ground in her sleep.
Love.
So we'll come back to mental health. I actually want to jump back because, hilariously, you and I have never talked in depth about lessons learned at GitHub. So let's start just bare bones, right?
Yeah.
How big was GitHub when you started? Maybe even for folks who don't know, what is GitHub in brief? And what was the trajectory in the 4.5 years you were there?
So GitHub, I was employee 200. And I think the way to best describe GitHub is it's the place where developers go to develop. This huge code repository where everything, we like to say everything that's ever been built and will be built is built on GitHub. So I was employee 200, and I scaled it to, like 1,500 before we sold to Microsoft at the end of 2018. And I think, lessons learned, it's so amazing because so much of the work that I do now is because of my connections with GitHub and working with founders that were previously employees there that have gone to build their own thing.
That's how we were introduced, right? It was Merritt, the former head of people at GitHub.
Right. And so I think, didn't understand the power that was harnessed in that just community of people and just the brilliant minds and just what they were seeking to build and achieve for the tech ecosystem. And I think lessons learned is it's the most beautiful place that I've ever worked as far as just the humans and just the pace of innovation and the desire to be great and just the obsession with developers and wanting to bring something really incredible to developers and just build an amazing product, which was so great. I think being at Kaiser, it's hard, it's nebulous. Like there's so many doctors and so many care providers. You're not laser focused on one thing. But I think it was in the midst of a lot of things that were happening, the reckoning at Uber and the Google manifesto. And I was there in a snapshot of time.
What were the years? Was it
So I was 2014 to 2019.
Cool.
So there was a lot of shift in the world. Like the Black Lives Matter movement started through that. And, we were detaining, folks at the border, and, we had a say in all of those things. And we took a position on those things as an organization and really built out a strategy around social impact and how we wanted to be bigger than who we were in the world. And so I think there was a lot of amazing things. I think on the employment law side, I got to face a lot of really incredible challenges, but it was everything that you hear about, like working nonstop and new challenges every day and, dealing with multi-generational and growing in all these countries. And how do you create an inclusive culture where you're dealing with folks from all different nationalities and backgrounds? And we used to say like stripes and colors and, all the things. And so it was really incredible, but it was really hard. And I think I've written about it. I've not found a place that I want to land because it was incredible, but it also burned me out in a real way where don't really have a desire to go back to that.
Yeah.
But it was amazing, and it's set me up with friends and life and opportunities forever. But it was definitely a challenging place.
2014 is about when I started to have conversations about distributed and remote work, right? And then, of course, we entered 2020 and the world started to talk about, Zoom meetings and remote work. Tell me about, and for folks listening and watching, GitHub's approach to distributed workforce.
I think that's where the last couple of years, I've kind of been like, this isn't new, folks. So it's kind of like when everyone's like, will you come and talk about hybrid work or will you talk about distributed work? I was like, my gosh, it's been around for forever. But I think coming on board, it was very much that. Like one of my biggest projects was bringing forth all these folks that were around the world and making sure that they didn't feel like they were second-class citizens because they weren't sitting in San Francisco. And then building out international entities so that we could bring them under an umbrella and give them a place to go if they wanted to commune together outside of Zoom. But the philosophy from the beginning was basically the three founders were here in San Francisco, but everybody else was everywhere else. So it was like...
I think about that here, right? Like I am based in the Bay Area. We tend to hire in the Bay Area, but we have been by design a distributed team that then gets together to film, right? Jonathan on our team, who of course, well through the Responsive documentary, is in Austin. How do we support Jonathan or whoever else we hire, wherever else they are, not feeling like a second-class citizen because it's so easy for us to meet here where we are in the Zander Media office today?
And so the philosophy was always remote first. Always. We were hybrid. We weren't like Automatic or Envision that has ever been fully distributed. That was never it. But it was, how do we build a culture? How do we scale a business with remote first, from how we communicate to the tools that we use? I mean, we had owls and we're using Blue Jeans before Zoom was a thing. We had
Blue Jeans.
Cameras everywhere. We were doing time zone inclusive all hands meetings. And so it was very much like we were building programs, like, getting away from like a wellness stipend where people would build something and say, you have to go to the 24-hour fitness. Like that's not, it seems basic, but that was not inclusive of folks that were in other parts of the country or the world. And so it was always remote first. How can we communicate? How can we build programs that are thoughtful and intentionally built for a globally distributed workforce? And so it was kind of like not rocket science when this happened. And I know the trend now is like, okay, we were fully remote and now we're going back hybrid. How do we do it? It's like, okay, you know what I mean? Like there's everything that's going around right now. Like Google's going to see if it actually will work. It has worked in a lot of places. We should be talking to the places and the people that have done that, because it's not rocket science and it's not novel. Like a lot of companies have been doing it well for a long time.
I want to actually go back to your childhood. Will you talk a little bit about where you grew up? And specifically what I'm curious about is like, what did you dream about doing? I know your family a little bit. Specifically, you spent time with one of your sons. what did you want to do when you grew up? Like when you were 5 or 7 years old?
It's so funny that you asked me this because I'm writing a piece right now for my kids' school's magazine about service and how where my passion for serving others came from. And I'm like 2 paragraphs into this article, so it's very timely that you asked me this. I think being a child of an immigrant, coming from the Philippines, a very culture that's deeply rooted in their Catholic faith. I think my family came over believing in the dream that JFK, kind of pitched around, ask not what you can do for your country, what the country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And so I grew up in an environment where it was very much about how can we serve? How can we help others? And so everyone around me were teachers, nurses, healthcare professionals. And that was never really my thing. Mm-hmm. My dad always aspired to be a lawyer like JFK. And I think had law books in the house from early on. I wanted to be Clarice Starling from 7 years old. I wanted to be an FBI agent. That was my goal and aspiration. And I think I toggled between wanting to be a lawyer because I felt that that's the way that I could effectuate social change. And I think when I went to college, I thought, I can do it through civil service and become a government official, and then staring down the barrel of hundreds of thousands of dollars in loans. I was like, I can't work for $25,000 after I paid more than that to go to college, right? So I chose the path of the law, and that's where I've always wanted to be. And in writing this article, I feel like it's the marriage of what I've always wanted to do, which is to serve others. And so I use my education and my background to help others, not in a way that you think in a courtroom, fighting for justice, but really fighting for equality and fairness and equity inside of companies and also in communities. Mm-hmm. So I feel like I've always said I've lived my passion through my work. It just happens that I love to do it in my life and in my job. I think that's a gift that I've been blessed with. A lot of people don't get to do that. So that's what it's been. So it's been lawyer, politician, FBI agent. So lawyers where it's stuck.
I want to stick with FBI agent just for a second. What was it about you at 7 that FBI agent was something you wanted?
I don't know. It's not like I had anybody in law enforcement in my life. I think there was just the possibility. I liked the profiling of the criminal aspect of things and using that sort of really analytical mind to bring people that are doing wrongs in the world to accountability, I guess. And Jodie Foster was amazing in that movie, and I was like, you're like a boss. It's all dudes and you're crushing people. I think from a young age I was like, geez, this is awesome. She was amazing in that movie.
So to be of service, lawyer, we've never talked about your time at Kaiser, at all. And you spent 8 years, I believe, at Kaiser, something like that?
Close to 10, yeah.
So talk to me about being a lawyer within Kaiser and sort of your come up as an HR professional in the healthcare field.
So the journey at Kaiser was interesting, right? And it was interesting because I lost my dad the year after I graduated suddenly. He was 53, and it was kind of like my whole world turned upside down. And I talk about it in small circles, but you tend to always get these things out of me. And so it was kind of like, was this just his dream or was it mine? And I kind of took 6 months off and packed up my car and moved to San Diego, where I partially grew up. That's where he grew up. And just sort of said, what am I going to do with my life? I've been away from home for, 7 years. And I just felt sort of untethered and unhinged. And came back and, like I said, history, family in healthcare. My tita was a nurse executive at Kaiser, and she said, I can get you a job here. Tita is my aunt, my dad's oldest sister. And she said, I can get you a job here. You just need to work. Sitting and wallowing and figuring out, do you want to do this? Do you not? Is not going to work. You need to get out there and start working. And so Kaiser embraced me. And it's wild. I mean, I was a law school graduate and I started out as an executive admin. And I'll never forget the story that changed I'm going to tell you this story. This story changed my life. The first day I was living in Saratoga, I had to take the car to the Fremont BART station and then ride BART all the way to Oakland MacArthur Station.
This is like South Bay Area,
yes.
Extended Bay Area, South Bay. Yeah.
Yes, up here. And what I did that first day was mail merge labels to put on envelopes for the doctor's holiday party.
Okay, keep going.
And I went home that day and I cried and said, I'm not going back.
Yeah.
And my Tita looked at me, and it is the most transformational moment in my life. She looked at me and said, you are not a lawyer. If you don't want to mail labels on envelopes, then commit to taking the bar and getting out of there. But this is going to pay your loans back, and it's going to put a roof over your head, and it's going to teach you what it means to like put in the work. And it was brutal, but it changed my life, because 2 months later, I'm like, I'm not staying here. I'm going to do this. And they gave me a sabbatical, and I took and passed the bar, and they kept me because I said, I'm going to go be a county, counselor. I'm going to go work for the EOC. And they put me on a path to grow. And I think that's sometimes where we miss in the tech ecosystem. We don't have the infrastructure to really grow.
Yep.
I was put through leadership diversity development programs, advanced management classes, and literally within every 12 to 18 months, I had a new job.
Yeah.
Because it was like, I want to put you here. We should take you there. And I was on the path to be the CEO of a hospital. And that's when I looked at myself and I'm like, this is not what I aspired to do. But I loved it. I had mentors, like all these things we talk about in tech. How do we build mentorship programs? How do we build coaching? Like, we need to look to some of these like storied industries and established places that do this work well and figure out what could translate and what could scale. And that was what got me to GitHub. It was like, we need somebody that has business acumen, that's build a diversity, equity, and inclusion platform somewhere, that knows how to do performance management, because I had learned how to do all of that at Kaiser. So even though I wasn't litigating cases and I wasn't doing what I thought what I was going to do, I was cared for. I was in a very steeped like Filipino community that I needed after my dad passed to feel like some type of connection to my culture. And it was an amazing home and landing place for me for almost a decade. And I loved it.
Yeah.
Wearing my Crocs around and like with power suits. I mean, it's like so wild compared to like the tech world, but it was an amazing home for me for a long time. And it let me grow up and feel safe when I like really needed that.
Backtracking a little bit, how old were your parents when they came to the U.S.?
My dad was 3.
Oh, wow. Okay.
3. So my eldest Tita was 9, my middle Tita was 7, and my dad was 3. My grandfather was already here. He had transitioned over to the U.S. Navy from the Philippine Navy. So he was living in the States. And so it was my Lola, my grandmother, and my 2 Titas and my dad that came over. Yeah.
So flash forward, Kaiser, GitHub. I've been blessed to see the direct impact a little bit of your work today at Zander Media, and maybe we can use Zander Media as like a case study. But I've built a couple of companies. I'm not 20-something years old anymore. I'm 36 as of just last week. But I'm still a cis white man, right? Trying to build an organization. And we don't have outside VC funds, so we're not set on a specific growth trajectory, but I'm trying to build something pretty ambitious at Zander Media. And that comes with so many challenges, right? Like building a company in 2022 comes with, my father will often very sweetly turn to me. My dad built about a 30-person environmental consulting firm that he ran for 25 years. And he was like, I don't think I could, and that was the 80s and the 90s. I don't think I could build a company in 2022. I wouldn't know where to begin, right? Like it is both so complex with the internet and there are so many options for people out there. It's like a very low bar is that we have to build a great place to work, at least for me. And I feel blessed that, I'm surrounded by incredible people, yourself included, that I get to work with every day. But when you see people doing it well, what are they doing? Or when you see people fucking it up, what are the steps that you in your work today at Merritt Consulting, take steps to implement?
I think the biggest piece, and again, without like naming names, but just in the experience these last 3 years of going into kind of earlier stage companies and also working with more seasoned folks, I think it's surrounding yourself with people that have, a variety of perspectives and opinions, that have a variety of experiences and have seen it go well and not go well. And I think there has to be a certain degree of vulnerability. A lot of my work is with founders and co-founders and C-suite execs now. And it's kind of like putting that ego to the side and saying, what can I be doing? And I think the reluctance is always to feel like because you're the CEO and the founder, you have to know the answers all the time. And when people ask me, Merritt, what do you do? Like if they'll call me and say, Merritt, can you help me build a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy? I'm like, have any of your people come to you and told you they want to do this? Well, no. Then why are you doing it? Is this performative work where you just want to like increase your numbers or your investors are asking you to do that? Or has one of your employees come to you and said, you know what? This doesn't feel good. I've served on 5 interview panels and we've seen, no Black or brown people come through here.
Right.
So what's happening here? Like, what can we be looking at? Or I'm looking at our users and I'm seeing that there's not a lot of diversity in our customer set. Like, why is that? For me, it's ask the questions, have the conversations, talk to your people. For me, it always comes back to the people, right? And so you don't have to have the answers. Why aren't you seeking those out from others? And don't go to the same like legacy thinking. Like, don't always go to your founder set and say, what are you doing in your shop? I think I wrote this on my website. Like, I love that people are out there making playbooks and are giving LinkedIn learning courses on how to do this. My perspective on this is very different. I approach it from a lawyer. I've never seen the same fact pattern in 22 years as a legal professional. Never. That's why lawyers still exist. If it was that simple, it would all been resolved. Right. And it's written in the case law and you do it and you move on.
Yep.
I take that same approach to my work today. Like, talking with you all at Zander Media, going to XYZ Corporation, nobody's facts are the same. Nobody's needs are the same because everybody's people are different and the needs are different. So spend time there.
One thing that I struggle with or spend a lot of time thinking about is ultimately I'm the founder and the CEO of Zander Media. Decisions are mine to make. And Angela, who is here in the room, will often be like, hey, Robin, sometimes I just want you to make the decision.
Yeah.
And how to balance the need to, right? Because we're not a consensus, right? No. Any company, especially a much, much larger company than, the 10 of us at Zander Media, but like even us, we're not, everyone is going to agree on every decision all the time.
No.
And a funny story that I've never shared with you. So I spent 6 months in Costa Rica my sophomore year of high school, living and working and going to high school at a Quaker school in Monteverde in Costa Rica. Because it was a Quaker school, the whole community made decisions as a group. And they would spend 6 hours, 8 hours sitting in group, 70 people on a Sunday, debating things like single versus double ply toilet paper. And it was an incredible, like, I will never look back on that time with anything but gratitude. But I remember, like, I was, however old I was, 14, in the middle of the cloud forests in Monteverde, Costa Rica. I wanted to go climb trees. And we had to sit as a group until the people who cared settled on single versus double ply toilet paper for la escuela, for the school. I didn't give a damn. I wanted to be done, right? Like, decision making doesn't have to be done by consensus.
Yep.
But something that I think about being so sensitive to the wants of my people and my community, when to make decisions myself and when to delegate those decisions and how much influence to have on them or to step back and say, this is not something I need to be a part of.
I think having been in both situations, having a head of that doesn't make decisions makes things really difficult inherently, right? Because there becomes kind of this next line of leadership and there's infighting and it's like, who's going to have the most influence? And so I feel like agreeing on what the philosophy is, if it's disagree and commit or, whatever it is, I think there should be a robust sort of not hours and hours about the toilet paper, but like agreeing, like, these are our operating norms. We're going to discuss this for this period of time. And then at some point we're going to make a decision. And I think it's also how you set it up.
What is disagree and commit?
I think it's exactly that, right? The toilet paper thing, you're not going to sit and talk for 4 hours about it. It's like, we have 20 minutes on the agenda. You don't necessarily have to fully agree with the entire approach. You may disagree with it, but for the sake of the business, for the sake of the community, we're going to move forward, because maybe it's 7 out of the 10 people that are, like I always say, do you want to die on this hill? Like, we're not running a company where this is like a long, war, if you will. I hate using that example, but like winning one battle does not mean that you're going to have the stamina to get through. Right. And so those are sort of the euphemisms that I use, where it's kind of like, you don't have to agree with everything, but can you get to a place where you can at least see the other idea and see that there is merit, never mind the pun, to that argument? And if so, can you get on board? Because it's not just you. You've got 40 recruiters behind you that like we need to get moving so we can get talent in here and keep like making the widgets. Right?
Yep.
So I think that the other piece that I struggle with, like, having been in the leadership, is because my inclination is to serve, and I'm always just like, I want to help and do whatever. And I have a hard time like taking all the things sometimes, but like, they are looking to you to lead. Whether you want to believe it or not, you are on that executive team. You are founder of your company, the leader of your business. They're expecting you to lead. Like, they see that you, like, for me, it's like learning that folks, even after I left GitHub, was like, I know that I wasn't in the room, but I knew that you being there, that my thoughts, feelings, experiences were going to be represented there, that you were going to speak up when you needed to, that you were going to fight when you needed to, that you were going to like let things go and move forward when you needed to. And so I think that speaks to the like diversity of the people that you have around you, so that you're mindful of your gaps. Like, where don't I kind of see things? What are my blind spots? How can I identify talent that can help me, like check me? Like, I've seen, with Angela and even with Star Fox, them being like, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Like, if you surround yourself with people that are yes people, you're going to get into situations like we talked about earlier, where then it's like a cleanup effort. So I think that it's a balance of listening, but not putting everything out for consensus, and not saying that you're not going to have a say or input on every single thing. But my default is to that. And I do that through intentional meetings and circulating things as I'm working on a handbook or a policy or a program. Does this land or not? Because I can't be so narcissistic to think that I know how to do
everything.
this.
Yeah.
And it's going to be great for every person. It's not.
When you walk into a new company, whether that's a virtual company and you're walking in via remote meetings or phone calls or email, or actually walking into an office, and take it either side. If you walk into somewhere great, what are the signs that point that it's great? Or if you walk into something that's toxic and you're like, nope, not here. What are the signs, whether that's the executive team or, the trash can overflowing, like whatever those things are, what do you look for to understand the leadership team, their qualities, and the culture of an organization?
I love that. I think, one, how many people do I get access to is huge, because a big piece of my business that I love, depending on where you're at, is I come in and do like a pretty broad-based assessment where it's talking and also assessing policies, processes, right? Looking at all of your company collateral. And I think I look at, one, is this just an exercise to check a box, or do you genuinely feel that there's a need and that there's something that is problematic? If I don't get to talk to the people and you're only giving me access to like C-suite execs, that's a red flag for me, because there's something there that you don't want me to see. I think there needs to be a lot of listening, right? That what I've seen with some folks is like they bring me in and then it's like they want to tell me all the things, but they don't want to kind of listen around like, what's my approach? What am I going to look for? What do I, want to see? How the experience that I bring to the table, it's kind of like, it's performative in that way, where it's obviously somebody has said, you need this person to look at this. And you're basically just carrying out, like, she's here, she did it, we're done, here's the report, and we're complete. So for me, it's also leaders that are really in tune with their people, leaders that are hungry to learn, how might you do this better? Like being vulnerable to the fact that something's not working, that's why you're here, we need help, and being willing to execute and do it. Again, it comes back to that ego, like not having an ego in the game, just saying, I need help. You've done this before. Can you impart some knowledge and let's work together on it? And putting resources behind it. Like, don't just come in and say, we want to do these things, but then not resource it. Not resource employee resource groups, not resource looking at your benefits programs to see if they're inclusive, not wanting to put in a tech stack that could help you manage performance better. And I think ultimately on the people side, not being open to vulnerability as a CEO or a founder, not putting yourself in an AMA and taking questions from your team. That's like the number one red flag. I should have said that up top. If you're not willing to sit in an environment and answer questions from folks about the direction of the business or what your thoughts are on, our talent strategy or how we're building a more inclusive product or what's our runway. If you can't sit and be vulnerable and you're hiding behind a prepared deck or questions, that's also a red flag. Because for me, you need to default to transparency and over communicate.
Yeah.
Because things start to break when you're not building a culture of trust and honesty because people don't know where they fit in.
Maybe this is related or maybe it's different, but you've spent a lot of time within rapidly scaling organizations, right? So separate from diversity initiatives, separate from the toxicity of you walk into an office and it's clearly going well or it's not. When you see organizations scale quickly doing it well, what are they doing? Or when you see an organization that is trying to scale quickly, especially if they have outside funding or right, whatever the reasons are, when they fail at that, what are the ways in which they sort of stereotypically fail at that?
So it's hard, like everybody likes to say the DE&I is a separate thing. I don't see it as that. It's integrated at all places. Where I see things break down is not recognizing that when you scale, essentially what's happened is your internal network has run out, right? You've built to the place of the people that you know. And now you're having to really look intentionally at what are the types of folks what are the profiles, what are the competencies that you need. And oftentimes what happens is we're scaling so fast, we need to build, we're going to hire anybody off the street. You basically decrease the quality and the rigor because the pace has outrun you and you feel like you need a butt in the chair. And what's the downstream effect, right? Oftentimes, you may be bringing people in that aren't fully qualified. You might be bringing people in from all over the world, and you haven't spent the time to figure out the culture that we had with the 20 people that we knew is now needing so much more. You've brought in parents. You've brought in people from other international countries that maybe English isn't their first language. There's all of the different personas that you've brought in, and I think you don't build that. And that's where I always struggle. Like, I love recruiting, but when you invest so much in bringing in talent to scale because you need bodies to build things, you're not going along with it and intentionally investing in the culture. And shit breaks. Because people are human and people are fallible. And so the reality of it is like they're not intentionally trying to do this, that, or the other. But if you're not saying, here is how we operate, here are our values, here is what you can expect to get feedback from us so that you know that you're doing your job well, versus like, here's your amazing, beautiful, shiny Apple laptop that you've received. Good luck, right?
Yeah.
Check out the Notion or check out the, whatever, the wiki to see how to do your job. It's intentionally giving feedback. It's giving human connection. It's telling them, here's some money to focus on your wellness. It's giving them time and space to live their lives. It's also challenging them to work on things that matter, right? So like all of those things need to be built, communicating them with openly and honestly. Like, this is the stuff that breaks at scale because it's kind of, people turn into, we have this money, we need to build this thing, and the humans build the things, and we just bring them in without any sort of strategy
Structure.
and structure.
Yeah.
And that's oftentimes where I come in. It's like, oh my gosh, we hired 50 people last year and we don't have a handbook. And now somebody's asking for a 5-week vacation. I don't know what to do. We can't afford that. And I'm like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so inevitably somebody's coming in, usually because I'm coming in because something's broken.
Mm-hmm.
But hopefully it's like, bring me in early. Like I'm at a company that's 20 people and it's awesome because it's like you get to build the stuff now.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Invest now.
Switching gears a little bit, sports is big in your life and in your family's life. When did that start? And what sports, maybe if you want to describe, like what sports does your family, do your kids play?
Sure. So I grew up as a soccer. My dad was a director for LA County Parks and Rec growing up. So I lived at the park. So I was the one girl playing Little League, you know, back in the day. And I won't say how early that was, you know, aging myself. But so baseball was always the thing. My dad played semi-professional slow pitch softball. And he loved basketball. So my sister played basketball. I played soccer, ran track, and played softball. My kids now we are like ball sport people. So my 2 boys play basketball and baseball year round. And my daughter, much to her chagrin, left Little League and went to softball, to the underhand pitching this year. So she does softball and basketball, and I don't know. My mom's wanting her to do dance. We'll see how it goes. She's going to a dance camp next week. I said to my mom on the way up here, I'm like, Mom, why do you want her to do dance so much? I'm like, I did tap and ballet in kindergarten. And I said, you know what? I'm done with this. And I went to play soccer. And she plays soccer too. So yeah, sports is definitely like, we live it.
What are the similarities between sports, especially at like high performance levels, and business? And then also, what are maybe we could actually start, our mutual friend, Caitlin Holloway always asks this question, right? Is a high performance team a sports team or a family?
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah.
That's sort of phenomenal.
It's phenomenal. It's a little brutal too.
It's sort of brutal. I don't know how to answer that. I guess I can talk about like the similarities between sports and work, if I can approach that first. Again, going back to kind of this whole notion that in tech, we feel like we often need to totally innovate and reinvent the wheel, right? Like we don't take things from other places. I think it's the same. Like when I think about like leadership, and I even like wrote about it on my website, where it's like, how did I learn to be this way? I learned to be this way through being on a team and being coached, right? Now we want to give executives coaches all the time. Those of us that have been in sports our whole lives, we've always had a coach.
Right.
Right?
I've spent my whole life receiving notes and feedback. It's weird in context where I don't have somebody giving me notes, whether that's on my handstands or on, you know, a talk that I just gave or whatever it is.
Exactly. So like being receptive to constructive feedback from a very early age, learning what it means to share. Like we talk about collaboration, like that being the buzzword. You got to share the ball, right? Like you're not the only person on a soccer team. You're not the only person on a softball team. Right? I mean, obviously there's individual sports. Like I don't have tennis players or golfers or swimmers or anything. Like my kids play team sports and I played team sports. So there's the individual that you're managing as a parent and whatever around like seeking individual performance and bringing your best and being really incredible at your craft and like taking your role very seriously and realizing like seeing where it fits into the collective. It's the same thing in a business. Right? But it's having the coaching. It's getting the feedback around, hey, I didn't make that pass really well, or that penalty kick, I'm kicking it over the goalpost because I don't have my foot set right on the ball. I don't know that we do that well. I don't think we do that well. We're not used to it. I feel like oftentimes I'm involved because people don't want to have the hard conversations.
Building cultures of feedback.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like if people were to say, what is the thing that screws up everything? It's like this fear and not wanting to tell somebody they didn't do a good job at something.
So this is so perfect and timely. You know, I have a lifelong affinity for handstands, and I'm pretty much every day now working on my handstands. I spent 2 hours this morning with my acrobatic crew in San Francisco doing acrobatics and handstands. And the newest student in class, right? Like I'm pretty good at handstands at this point. I have a long way to go, but like I'm doing well. The newest student in class, I hope, feels free and will come up and like, oh, can you push more through your shoulders, right? Or, oh, it looked like your hands were too far apart there. And certainly I, right, can give other people feedback. There is this culture of feedback. It's individual sport, but it's as a team. It's as a group, right? And how do we build in, I'm thinking of this for Zander Media, I'm thinking about this for the work for the rest of my life. How do we build in cultures of feedback where like little notes, right? Or another example, when I was an acrobat with the opera, with the San Francisco Opera in 2015, 2016, it's assumed that you receive 15 points of feedback every single rehearsal. Like you get a point of, thank you. Here's a note. Thank you. Right? There isn't a in the workplace any more than you're walking down the street and someone is like, right? Like maybe if they're really polite and you have toilet paper stuck to the bottom of your shoe, they'll be like, hey, there's something on the bottom of your shoe. But like, how do we build that culture of feedback into a working world that, as you say, doesn't have that habit that we do in athletic pursuits?
Again, I think it's establishing it early on, like making it okay. I think in this place of innovation where we find ourselves, it's like failure isn't okay, right? I just watched that, documentary on NASA and the space shuttle and like, how many iterations of that and how there were failures, unfortunately. But like, we talk about it. We say we're going to ship and iterate, right? But then it's kind of like...
And then it goes wrong and someone gets fired.
Yes.
Yep.
Or they get talked about and then it's like, you don't want to be that person. Whereas it was okay that I didn't make the goal. Like maybe I did lose the game because I headed it into the wrong goal. But like, how do you learn from that? How can we accept not always being perfect or not always getting it right? And it comes from leadership and it comes from the pace in which we're willing to maybe slow down to be intentional. And it is about being uncomfortable because I think oftentimes we see, I don't know, like with the coach, it's usually an older, more seasoned person. And we put that bias in our brain, right?
Yeah,
where it's
100%.
like, he or she's been around the block longer. They know they've done this before. So I'm going to take there. And I don't want to like reinforce those power structures. However, it is sort of like at GitHub as a perfect example. Before I got there, there were no managers. And I joined 2 months after they put in a manager structure. Everybody reported to the CEO until employee 200.
Holy shit.
Oh, there's lots written about it. And then all of a sudden, the guy or gal that was next to you coding is now your manager.
Yeah.
And that's weird.
Yeah.
So then what happened?
Yeah.
Nobody wanted to say you're not doing a good job.
We've just implemented management structure at Zander Media, right? Up until February of this year, right? Like everyone reported to me, and now that is no longer the case, right? And I have mixed feelings about that.
Yeah. But I think it's creating those operating norms. Like I'm going to assume best intent when I'm providing you feedback. I'm going to do my very best to present it in a constructive way. And if I don't, and that's not how you receive it, like please give me the feedback and I will, giving people coaching, letting them know how to do that, letting them learn how to give feedback. But that's it's literally the single point of failure. It's, I don't want to make somebody feel uncomfortable.
So I'm just going to avoid it.
I'm going to avoid it.
Yeah.
And you avoid it long enough until something breaks. And then it is like, I had a corneal abrasion on my eye. It's still there. Like there's going to be a bruise on my eye forever, even though it doesn't affect me. That's what happens. It's a bruise that never goes away. Like it's there.
Yep.
But it's hard to course correct for that type of cultural bruise than if you invest in it early and make it okay. And you're not going to always get it right.
Yeah.
My kids I give feedback so frequently that they're like, would you ever like celebrate that I do something well? Because I'm always like, you could have done this a little bit better. Like, what do you think about this? Might you have tried that? Well, what about the basket I scored? Or how about how fast I ran the race? Like I cornered that base path right. And I'm like, so I over-index, but that's what I'm used to. So I feel like there's got to be some kind of balance.
Do you have any resources or recommendations, whether that's books or whatever, on how to build cultures of feedback, how to give feedback well?
Gosh. Again, for me, it's just sort of innate. So it's hard for me to say, what do you do? Like it's more of a one-to-one, like how could you provide this? How can you listen? Like I feel like there's frameworks out there. Like, having standard questions, having one-to-ones. Like I've talked with you about this. Like, don't just make it a check-in every 6 months. Like, be talking constantly. And, one of the things I learned at Kaiser, like in one-to-ones, it was always like, what's working well? What's not working well? What do you need? Do you have the resources that you need? It's kind of like creating that where people feel empowered to ask and to give.
Yep.
Like, what could I have been doing differently? And it starts with the leader, like the vulnerability. Like, where did I miss this week? And they're like, well, you slapped me at 9:45 p.m. and I was like already in bed and I felt like I had to get up and do the job. And I'm like, great, 100%. Like, I'm done. We're not going to do that. So I don't have the books or the resources. I feel like product placement, like Lattice is amazing as a tool to like use. I feel like as an operator, it's the best tool on the people space to say there's so many little vignettes and blog posts that tell you how to give and receive. And I think their tool makes it really easy for people that are uncomfortable doing it.
Nice.
And so I feel like I love Lattice for that.
Yeah.
And then it's just practicing. Life Labs has really great courses too on like basic management and creating a feedback culture.
To both Lattice and Life Labs Learning.
Yeah.
For folks watching and listening.
Those two are the best. And then it's like you and I have talked about this around like your pitch or whatever, like finding a partner that you can like model things with. Oftentimes someone will call me and be like, I need to have a feedback conversation. Can I just like talk you through how I would do it? And as ridiculous as it seems, I'm a writer. I script everything out for people and I invite them to do the same. When you're uncomfortable, have an outline, follow a script and rehearse it so that you don't get caught off guard and that you hit your points. Because when you can read it and say, oh my gosh, if I said that, that is like not okay. But it also doesn't allow you to go off on a tangent. You have a structure. And oftentimes, media training, if you don't know how to stick to a plan, you end up saying things you don't want to say. So write an outline, script it out, and practice it in front of the mirror like we did in speeches, when we were younger.
As you think about raising your family and sort of this next iteration, and we'll talk briefly about Merritt Plus at the end, what are things that you're doing in being a parent that you've learned at work and things that you are now bringing back to the workplace that you've learned as a parent?
Amazing. I think that, it's so perfect with having kids and talking about like them working on projects. Like at a young age, I didn't start working on group projects and collaborating on things until probably
college.
late high school and college. And they're doing it so much younger now.
Cool.
Right? Like putting a deck together or a research project. And I think teaching them now what it means to be a piece of that and how to be, I teach my kids to be leaders, right? How do you lead? How do you ensure that everybody has their say, that everybody's doing their part? How do you ensure that people are contributing? How do you make space for their, talents to be included in whatever you're working on? And so I think that's where a lot of my coaching comes in as a parent that models what happens at work, right? Just to say, I'm going to go do it all by myself because nobody's doing it the way that I want, it doesn't work that way, right? You have to be able to pull out and tease out the passion, the creativity, the talent from working with a group of 6 people that are very different, that have different talents, different ideas, and not just going to the teacher and saying, tell us what to do, just like you wouldn't in a business. Right? So like, what is that modeling? It's initiative. It's influence. Influence is such a huge trait and talent to learn. You know what I mean? And I'll give a brief little story. Gus, which you've been involved with Gus for a long time, he's coming off the 6-month injury of the broken leg.
For context, Gus, your son.
My eldest son. And he was really fearful about 3 weeks ago. So I'm in the hospital, in and out of the hospital. My mom's in and out of the hospital, and my son is supposed to try out for this baseball team. He hasn't touched a baseball since October 31st when we were in Las Vegas. And I could just sense and vibe that something wasn't right. And I was like, what's going on? And he's like, I'm afraid for the first time I'm not going to make the team.
And for context, Gus is an avid sportsman.
Right. And I said, I like went into myself and I said, what can I do here? And I called the old president of our little league, whose son plays for the older team. And I just sort of broke down. I'm like, he wants this. He doesn't know how to get there. I'm worried. And he goes, take him to the field today. I'll be there. Tell him I'll be there at 5:15. He worked him out for 2.5 hours. And I came home and I said, this is what matters. That you have built a relationship enough that this guy is going to leave his job early to get you prepared because he knows that you want this and that you're willing to put in the work.
I'm thinking rehearsal. It's the same as your answer about feedback, right? Is the practice of it. Yeah.
And so it's about, for me, like creating that human connection with others so that maybe when you don't see eye to eye on things, like when we're talking about disagree and commit, your team's around the table. You've got Angela and Jonathan, Star Fox, and you all are having to struggle with a decision, but you have enough of a relationship with one another that you know it's not personal, right? That you can respect each other, that you're looking at it differently, but at the end of the day, it's what's best for Zander Media. You know what I mean? And so I said, for Gus, when you build those relationships, to all of my kids, you build those relationships that you're trustworthy, that you care, that you're going to be a good listener, that you're going to be a part of a team and help solve problems with others, even if you don't see eye to eye. I mean, that's life. That's kids. That's grown-ups in a work environment. It's things that we always are looking for a book or an expert to tell us when it's right in front of us in our everyday life.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. All right. There's so much, and maybe at some point we'll need to do a round two. For the time being, what is Merritt Plus Consulting, this new initiative that you've just recently launched? Who is it for, and where can folks go to learn more?
Amazing. So Merritt Plus is me finally coming out of what we would call in the tech world, like out of stealth mode. I think that I've had the opportunity to work with some amazing companies over the last 3 years to kind of come in and be their phone a friend, fixer, seer, helper. And now I just want a place where people can come. And I feel like I have a hard time selling myself. And so now having a landing page at merrittplusconsulting.com where people can be like, yeah, I vibe with her. I think that she'd be a good person to come in and figure out if she can help our team on all the things. If I were to say, what do I love to do? I just love doing it all and creating a really intentional approach for a company on anything people related. As an employment lawyer, I can look at your legal stuff too. But really want to work with founders and leaders that want to be a real people-obsessed organization that realize that the humans are what sort of make all this innovation happen. And so how can we create really awesome places for them to work and to be amazing in their authentic selves? That's it. So it's just an opportunity for me to get to do what I love with people that I love, and that's it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Merritt, thank you for taking this time.
I love talking to you always. So
thank you.
Thank you.